Remember the Titans makes you realize that you want to have a fun football season. Let's just have football. I think that would be fun enough. Nobody really wants anything else but that right now. Yes,
fun, sir.
That's exactly right. Speaking of sir, we'll go to our buddy Connor O'Gara from Saturday Down South, joining us here on a Monday. Connor, sir, how are you? How was your weekend?
Not bad. It's funny you mentioned the subject of whether or not we think football is fun, because there amazingly are still people out there who think that people who cover college football don't think that college football is fun, and therefore we want college football shut down because we don't like our jobs. I don't really get that.
Have you been accused of that yet yourself? Because there have been many columnists that have written something that's just been cautionary about what it is we're going to try to do, and the next thing you know, fingers are pointed. You obviously must be rooting for disaster, which just makes no sense to me.
Here in Florida, around this time of year too, we're in hurricane season. If I was sitting inside and I said to my wife, "Hey, look, I think a hurricane is coming. Everything on the news says a hurricane is coming," and we would prepare for the hurricane, my wife wouldn't then turn to me and be like, "Wow, you must want our house to just completely go up in smoke, and you must be rooting for the hurricane."
That is so perfectly put. You never hear anybody telling a meteorologist when a hurricane is bearing down on you, "Can't you just be optimistic that the thing's going to curve away?" I've never heard him tell him that before. That's very well said. Connor, I had a theory that this week, with baseball starting, that what college football is trying to do, now they can't look to the NFL because the NFL has no clue what they're doing right now, and they haven't even started yet. What baseball is trying to do seems to me to be a little more like what college football is trying to do. Regionalize your schedule, even more so. You're having teams travel, but you're going to try to mitigate the amount of travel that they do. And that's much different than anything that the NHL, NBA, MLS is trying to do. So when I'm watching baseball this weekend and into the next week or two, I'm watching that also with an eye of thinking, gosh, I hope this works, because then maybe college football works.
It does seem like the college football administrators are looking to Major League Baseball and trying to find out, is this feasible? Is this feasible? Because if it's not feasible at the professional level, it's definitely not going to be feasible at the college level. And I realize that there are obvious differences in what they're doing from a social standpoint, and the exposure that college athletes obviously have within their communities, and the fact that people live in their communities. And it's different than being down here in Orlando, where the NBA has its own sort of bubble situation set up down by Disney. But, yeah, I mean, I do think that they are looking to Major League Baseball, because if all of a sudden you have cases that are spiking from being around certain, with players being in close proximity to each other, and this thing doesn't look like it's under control at all, that's not going to be a good sign for college football starting on time or starting at all in 2020. And I think that while there are certain things to remember about the differences between college and Major League Baseball, there's no precedent for this. I mean, there really isn't. So they'll take whatever they can get at this point. If that's a data point where they can look at Major League Baseball and say, this is how often they're testing, even though the sport is different, they're still not necessarily seeing these cases spike, and they're figuring out the right way to do this with a somewhat regionalized schedule, then that's something that we feel like we in college football can try and replicate somewhat and hope for the best. Because at the end of the day, if they play this season, that's what they're going to be doing. That's what they're going to be hoping for the best, and hoping that the policies that they have put in place, which they have never put in place before, are going to hold up, and there's going to be at least some element of trial and error.
Connor, I think we might have brought this up last week, and if there is college football, you really do, it does seem like there's some momentum building towards this ACC, Big 12, SEC scheduling alliance. It makes sense for so many reasons, but you also have a sense that this makes sense in the future, not just during a pandemic, but to get matchups that draw eyes, and to have like-minded institutions essentially playing at the same level. That's why all these institutions joined conferences to begin with, that they were speaking with and dealing with like-minded institutions on a sports and on an academic level. And I feel like with Power 5 football being so much, there's so much more money in it and just so much more that these schools have than lower level. Man, this is the point. And I feel like this scheduling alliance, which I think will happen, will be the point where college football turns to that for good.
So you bring up that about how these conferences are looking to one another to fill out their schedules, which is just a reminder that these schedules in non-conference play being filled out 10 years in advance is a bit ridiculous when all it takes is athletic directors sitting down, drawing up a contract that they've probably drawn up 1,000 times before and figuring out a way to make this work. But the point that I think is worth remembering with all of this, and I hate that this seems like it's going to be a byproduct, but it seems inevitable. How many Group of 5 and FCS programs are going to go under as a result of this current season? Maybe if that's a result of getting matchups canceled. I've talked about Kent State and possibly missing out on upwards of $5 million for the 3 matchups that they were going to have against Power 5 teams in non-conference play this year. If all of a sudden those teams aren't in existence at all, yeah, the Big 12, the SEC, the ACC, everybody's going to have more slots to fill over the course of the next decade for their non-conference scheduling. Could they adopt something like that? Could they figure out a way to rotate on a yearly basis and figure out a way that they're playing every single Power 5 conference in non-conference play at some point within a 4-year stretch? You don't have like 10 years where an SEC team, a specific SEC team doesn't face anyone from the Pac-12. Can we figure out a way to do this in a post-COVID world that makes sense, and there are actually some benefits from a scheduling standpoint without worrying about what the schedule is going to look like in 2029, because that's what every AD freaks out about, and they want that headline, and they want to get it out there, and they want to build that hype. Can we actually look at this from a practical standpoint and figure out the best way to do this to maximize those matchups and to make sure that we are getting a wide variety of them, and it's not necessarily just the same thing that we're used to seeing on a yearly basis?
Speaking to Connor O'Gara here on Halftime, Connor, carrying on with that conversation a little bit, if it did come to that point, and this is just shooting dust into the wind right now, and I saw where this was shared on Saturday Down South earlier a couple days ago. What do you think the chances would be if way down the road the conferences branch away from the NCAA and almost come together and form 4 mega conferences? Because when you speak specifically to the Power 5, financially, kind of whenever this thing is, when we get past COVID-19 and we kind of get back to some sense of normalcy as far as for scheduling and different things like that, when you look at like forming these big conferences, when I read this article, I saw nothing but positives of that. I don't know. I was curious what your opinion is of that, if it were to get to that point 2-3 years down the road.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like right now, more than ever, we're realizing that the Power 5 conferences don't need the NCAA for much of anything. And it felt like the NCAA coming out with their COVID regulations for testing and all that was basically just like, hey, you guys should probably do something. There's been a pandemic going on for the last 4 months. Instead of figuring out who's going to be eligible and who's not, you should probably figure out some stuff that's actually proactive and not just how much money this school should be able to give to this specific student athlete. So from that standpoint, I think we've realized that the NCAA is really kind of at the mercy of these Power 5 conferences. Now, whether they choose to merge into a Power 4, from a revenue standpoint, I'm not sure how all of that would shake out. But what seems to be likely is that the Power 5 is understanding that they have the ability to change the course of college football history. And because the NCAA doesn't have control over the college football playoff in the same way that they do with March Madness, they have that freedom available. Now, are they going to be able to do it in the right way to where they can come up with all these different policies that the NCAA has in place that the Power 5 conferences agreed to abide by? I think that's a different discussion. And I think the more I think about it, the college football czar doesn't make as much sense, just because you essentially are asking these Power 5 commissioners to turn over the power that they have, and everybody's at the mercy of their university president anyways. And I'm not sure how realistic that is, though at a time like now, it seems like there would have definitely been some benefits to that. I think the merging together is interesting, but that would depend on maybe how, if a Pac-12 or a Big 12 felt vulnerable and if the SEC or ACC or Big Ten, which I think are kind of moving the needle right now in terms of revenue, if they felt like they really needed to make that next step and maybe split up those other two conferences. But that's a little bit far down the road. It's hard to picture what the college football future looks like when so much of it for this current school year seems to be up in the air.
We started off the show talking about high school football in California being moved to the spring of 2021 or with a December or January start time. And you see these different organizations making their decisions, moving things to the spring. Right now, how confident are you that we could, like, when September 5th, whenever college football is supposed to be rolling around, how confident are you that we're going to kick things off on September 5th, or is this probably going to be pushed to later September, 1st of October?
I don't think September 5th is happening. I want it to happen more than anything.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that we're looking at later September, earlier October for a start date, just so that everybody can kind of get on the same page in terms of testing. They can minimize the window in which they're going to have to have a season, because right now you've seen athletic directors be like, I'm not even sure if we can get one game together, much less put together an entire season. So I think that's more realistic. The more I think about it, a spring season doesn't sound like a possibility, and I think that they really, really do want to avoid that at all costs because of the things that would present. And it's not just, maybe you'd have Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields leaving and not playing their final seasons, but because of what could it potentially do for the following season in the sport. And even the fact that, athletes, if all of a sudden you have athletes that if there's ever a push and a time in which it seems like athletes could form together and create a union, it kind of seems like this is it. And if that's the thing that pushes them in that direction of being like, hey, you're without any of your say, the administrators just decided that you're going to have 2 seasons in 10 months. Enjoy it. Go have fun. That seems like the type of thing that could prompt a possible unionization, and that would create a set of circumstances that the NCAA and the Power 5 does not want to go after at this point. So I think they're going to do whatever they can to try and play in the fall, and if we do have a season, it's going to start later than that Labor Day weekend. At least that's what I have mentally prepared myself for.
You're the man, Connor. Always appreciate the conversation. Thanks a lot. Have a great week.
Thanks, Connor.
Appreciate it, guys.
You got it. Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South. Give him a look on Twitter at CJ O'Gara. Speaking of college athletes unionizing, I'd read where a lot of Pac-12 players are banding together. This is something put together by the Cal football players, and they have put together a list of demands that they expect their schools to abide by. Otherwise, they're threatening to boycott the season. So this banding together, it's happening informally, but it's already beginning to happen. I think college athletes, specifically football players right now, have a sense of really how much power they might have. A lot more than we thought they had for years. 877-377-6963 to get with us. Got some Razorback news after the break. Stay tuned.